The Harbor Lantern was the kind of bar that carried the weight of Oceanside on its shoulders, old wood soaked in decades of spilled beer, salt air slipping through the door each time it opened, the jukebox humming with country songs that had outlived the men who first played them. On a winter Friday night, the place was alive with laughter, dart games, and the clink of bottles, the kind of simple noise that made people forget their troubles. Moving quietly through the crowd was Grace Walker, a waitress who looked too small for the trays she carried, her black shirt neatly tucked into jeans, dark hair tied back in a low ponytail. To anyone watching, she was ordinary, maybe even fragile, a 30-something woman just trying to make a living while visiting her father in the veterans' home across town. But behind those calm eyes, she counted exits, measured distances, and cataloged every face the way a soldier never stops scanning the battlefield. That night, trouble announced itself with the sharp crack of glass hitting the floor. Every head turned as beer splashed across the hardwood, and a tall man in a half-buttoned Marine uniform rose slowly from his chair, his voice booming through the bar. "Hey, you think you're somebody special, spilling drinks on a Marine's uniform?" His name, at least in Oceanside, was Nate Vargo, broad-shouldered, covered in tattoos, the kind of man who enjoyed watching people shrink under his shadow. His buddies leaned back in their seats, grinning, feeding on the tension. Grace immediately dropped to her knees, bar towel in hand, gathering the shards with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so softly it almost disappeared under the jukebox. Her apology drew a cruel laugh from the table. One man muttered, "Pathetic waitress," and another banged the table in delight. A few patrons looked uneasy, but no one moved. Nobody wanted to challenge four men in uniform on a Friday night. Vargo's boots hit the floorboards with deliberate weight as he stepped closer, grabbing Grace by the collar and yanking her upright. "Sorry? You think sorry cuts it?" His breath stank of whiskey. His grip meant to hurt. Phones lifted quietly, recording what looked like another viral clip of a drunk Marine scaring a waitress. Grace's shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor, her whole body speaking submission. To the casual eye, she looked like prey, a rabbit cornered by wolves. What no one in that bar realized was that every second she'd spent on the floor had been calculated. Each shard of glass picked up gave her time to count exits, to mark sightlines, to set the scene. The rhythm of her shallow breaths wasn't panic but control, the breathing of someone who knew how to slow a racing heart before violence. And in the corner, nursing his whiskey, Curl, Daniel Whitaker lowered his glass. 2 decades of leading Marines had taught him to recognize the difference between fear and stillness. Grace Walker wasn't afraid. She was waiting. The Harbor Lantern, a place of laughter and jukebox songs, was about to witness something it would never forget. The silence in the Harbor Lantern grew heavier after Nate Vargo's hand closed around Grace Walker's wrist, his grip designed to bruise, his voice dripping with the kind of arrogance that feeds on fear. "Look at this," he sneered, holding her arm up for the crowd, as though he was displaying a weak animal, and his friends roared with approval. Grace winced just enough to sell the act, her lips trembling as she whispered an apology. But what Vargo did not expect was the feel beneath his fingers. Her arm was not soft or fragile, but hard as braided steel, the muscle of someone who had carried rucksacks through mountains and pulled herself over endless bars on deployment. For the briefest second, his expression faltered, though he covered it with another bark of laughter. And in that flicker, Grace knew she had unsettled him. Around them, his crew began to move with an ease that only trained eyes would notice, spreading through the bar, not like drunken Marines, but like predators mapping a cage. Milan Petrov drifted toward the front entrance, his accent slipping when he barked at a couple trying to leave. Kane Willis shifted near the kitchen door, casually blocking the way with a stool. Tyler Shaw wandered between tables, but each step narrowed the space, tightening the patrons into a smaller circle. To most, it looked like random drunken shuffling. To Grace, it was the unmistakable tactic of men establishing fields of fire. Her eyes lowered, her voice kept small, but inside her head a clock was ticking, 17 minutes left until the package arrived, 17 minutes to hold position without revealing who she really was. She bent down again, to mop up a beer deliberately spilled by Kane, her posture hunched and submissive, yet her knees were coiled like springs, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. To an untrained eye, she was cowering. To anyone who had seen combat, she was in a low, ready stance, disguised as fear. Colonel Whitaker, from his corner, caught it again, the subtle way she scanned each exit, the precise 2-second pause on each doorway. He set his glass down, his veteran's instincts stirring, but still he said nothing. Evan Cole, the bartender, polished another glass, his jaw tight as his eyes flicked toward the hidden monitor under the bar, watching the security feed as though waiting for a signal only he could hear. Bo Ramirez, the bouncer built like a tank, shifted in his seat near the door, starting to rise, but Evan gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. Grace could feel the tension in the room like static before a storm. She adjusted her shirt, fidgeting nervously to hide the real purpose, making sure the fabric lay flat against her back, covering the ink that marked her true identity. Vargo smirked at her discomfort and leaned closer, his voice low and mocking. "You don't belong here, sweetheart. Maybe I should teach you some respect." He shoved Elena, the other waitress, when she tried to intervene, and the threat in his tone hung in the air like smoke. The bar's laughter had died. Even the jukebox seemed quieter, as if the walls themselves sensed what was coming. Grace's eyes dropped to the photo that slipped from her pocket, a smiling young girl in a wheelchair, surrounded by medical equipment. She reached for it desperately, whispering, "Please, that's my daughter." But Vargo's boot came down hard, grinding the picture into the sticky floor. "Your kid?" he sneered. "Where's the daddy?" Ran off when he saw what a pathetic... He never finished, because in that moment Grace went perfectly still. Not the stillness of fear, not the stillness of surrender, but the stillness that comes when a sniper settles into position. The air itself seemed to drop 10 degrees, and those close enough to see her face caught a glimpse of something dangerous, flickering behind her eyes, before it vanished beneath the mask of a trembling waitress. Combat breathing, inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4 steadied her pulse, and her gaze swept the room again. She marked Vargo's position, cataloged the weapons barely hidden beneath jackets, and measured distances with mathematical calm. Her scars itched beneath her shirt, reminders of battles survived and friends lost, 23 of them in all, each mark etched into her flesh as a promise. The crowd sensed something shift but could not name it, and phones continued to record, unaware they were capturing the seconds before a storm that would change everything. Vargo circled her like a predator, his crew locking down the lantern tighter with each step, and the patrons pressed into silence, trapped between fear and fascination. Grace remained hunched, her shoulders drawn, but inside she was already moving pieces on a battlefield invisible to everyone else. And when Vargo's laughter cut the air again, no one in that bar realized they were standing inside a cage carefully built for him, and the woman he thought was prey was the one holding the key. The harbor lantern had never felt so tense. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath, as Nate Vargo circled Grace Walker like a wolf testing a deer, though every instinct in him whispered that something about this woman was wrong. He tightened his grip on her wrist, forcing her to stumble closer, but instead of struggling, she simply stood still, shoulders low, eyes down, voice trembling as she whispered, "Please, I don't want trouble." To the crowd, she looked pitiful, a fragile waitress about to be broken. But Colonel Whitaker saw it for what it was, the deceptive calm before a battlefield ignites. Vargo leaned in, studying her, his predatory grin slowly fading into suspicion. "Something's off about you," he muttered, his tone no longer just mockery, but edged with unease. His men laughed to cover it, but even they shifted uncomfortably as if catching the same invisible current. Petrov called out, "Look, boss, she's got a tattoo," pointing at the faint ink peeking where her shirt had ridden up. "Probably some butterfly, trashy stuff." Kane Willis chuckled, though his voice cracked with forced bravado. Grace quickly tugged the fabric down, hiding the black lines, but it was too late. Vargo's eyes narrowed. "Turn around," slowly. The command was sharp, professional, nothing like the drunken bluster he had worn moments before. Grace hesitated, shaking her head, whispering again, "Please, don't." Vargo stepped forward impatiently, grabbed her collar from behind, and with one violent motion ripped the back of her shirt wide open. The tearing cloth echoed like a gunshot, followed by silence so complete it felt unnatural. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the ink came into view, stark against her skin, and the room froze. Across her back spread an eagle's wing, bold and meticulous. Not the mark of a careless tattoo, but a masterpiece carved in pain and memory. Centered within was the unmistakable eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps, flanked by a skull pierced by a dagger, the insignia of Force Recon. Beneath it, in letters black as midnight, were words that made every veteran in the room stiffen. Ghost 7, Kandahar, 2019. A whisper cut the silence, trembling from the lips of Mr. Donnelly, the old veteran who had been shoved earlier. Holy God, Ghost 7, she's real. Colonel Whitaker's face drained of color. He had heard the stories, the whispers about a Marine sniper who had died in Afghanistan, the Reaper of Kandahar, a ghost who should not be alive. Evan Cole dropped a glass behind the bar, the shatter splintering the silence just as Vargo's weapon hand wavered for the first time. His voice, once booming with arrogance, cracked as he stammered, "No, no, you're dead. We killed you. I watched you die." And that was when Grace lifted her chin. The meek waitress vanished, replaced by the steel gaze of a soldier who had walked through fire and carried ghosts on her back. Her voice, no longer soft or pleading, cut through the lantern like a blade. "Your intel was wrong, Vargo. You always did underestimate the ones you couldn't break." The name landed like a hammer, ripping away his American accent. His true Eastern European harshness broke through, betraying the war criminal beneath the uniform. Petrov's phone slipped from his fingers, still recording as it hit the floor and continued streaming, catching the fear spreading across faces that had moments earlier been so smug. Grace's eyes locked on Kane Willis, her tone calm but merciless. "That scar across your throat, you remember who gave it to you? 3 years ago, when you tried to execute a family in Coast?" My knife disagreed. Kane's hand flew to his neck involuntarily, his bravado crumbling. She turned toward Shaw without even granting him a full glance. "You still wake up screaming about the compound, don't you? The civilians you burned with white phosphorus, no scar on the body erases the scars on the soul." Shaw blanched, his predatory grin collapsing into something hollow. And then she turned fully back to Vargo, her voice dropping colder than the sea outside. "Nate Vargo, commander of Scorpion Cell, arms dealer, profiteer, and the man who sold defective body armor to Marines. 23 dead, including my sister." The words landed heavy, not just on Vargo, but on every patron who realized this was no random bar fight. They were standing inside the gravity of something far larger. The air thickened as Grace straightened, her back bare, the tattoo gleaming like a battle flag. In that moment, the harbor lantern was no longer just a bar on the California coast. It was a battlefield, and every soul inside knew they were in the presence of a predator no one had expected. The waitress was gone. Host 7 had returned. The harbor lantern was silent, except for the low hum of the beer cooler, every eye fixed on the torn shirt that revealed Grace Walker's back, the inked emblem of Force Recon glistening under the dim lights like a banner of war. And in that charged silence, Nate Vargo's face drained of its drunken bravado, his weapon wavering as though the steel itself had lost faith in his hand, because the name Ghost 7 carried the weight of whispered nightmares from Kandahar, and he knew he was staring at someone who should have been dead. Grace's voice slid through the room with calm precision, not loud, not rushed, but steady as a heartbeat, each word laced with the authority of someone who had carried the dead and survived to tell their story. Her eyes flicked to Milan Petrov, the man blocking the door, his knee turned slightly inward. "You still drag that left leg, don't you, Petrov? The IED in Mosul, 2017. They couldn't take the shrapnel out. You limp when you think no one is looking." Petrov stumbled back, his face ashen, the phone he had dropped earlier still recording, broadcasting his fear to anyone watching online. Grace turned her gaze on Kane Willis, her tone dropping colder. "3 scars across your neck, 3 inches left to right. My knife. You remember Coast, don't you? The family you tried to execute. 2 daughters, 1 son, parents, and a grandmother. You raised your rifle, I raised mine. You lost. They lived. And I never forgot." Willis's hand flew to his throat, his swagger gone, replaced by the panic of a man stripped naked in front of strangers. Then her attention shifted to Tyler Shaw, the one who had been herding the patrons together. She didn't bother to face him fully. She just spoke into the heavy air, and every syllable landed like a hammer. "White phosphorus. The compound. The civilians you burned alive. The smell still follows you into your sleep, doesn't it? You can wash your hands, but not your conscience." Shaw's grin collapsed into ash, and for the first time the crowd realized that the men who had strutted so confidently into the bar were not just bullies, they were predators exposed in the glare of truth. Finally, Grace turned back to Nate Vargo, her voice cutting sharper than any blade. You, Alexei Vargo, arms dealer, war criminal, the man who sold defective body armor to Marines, 23 dead because you wanted a bigger profit margin. One of them was my sister, Lance Corporal Sarah Walker. You didn't just kill her, you betrayed every man and woman who trusted that gear to save their lives. The words carved into the room, and Vargo's attempt at bravado shattered. That's impossible, he spat, his accent fully unmasked now, harsh Eastern European consonants scraping like broken glass. We killed you in Kandahar. I saw the reports. Ghost 7 is dead. Grace's eyes hardened, her chin lifting. Your intel was wrong. You've been chasing shadows, and tonight those shadows came for you. At that moment, Evan Cole, the bartender who had stood silent all night, slid his hand beneath the counter and produced not a weapon but a badge that gleamed in the dim light. U.S. Marshals Service. His voice carried calm authority. Everyone stay calm. This is a federal operation. Bo Ramirez rose from his stool by the door, his bulk no longer just a bouncer's frame but the coiled strength of a seal, speaking into a concealed mic. Overwatch here. Tango confirmed. Ghost 7 has positive ID on Vargo. The patrons gasped as the truth crashed down. This hadn't been a random bar scuffle. The harbor lantern had been a cage all along. Every stool, every table, every supposed drunk carefully placed pieces on a board designed to close around Scorpion Cell. Colonel Whitaker pushed to his feet, the authority of decades of command in his voice. Stand down, Vargo. It's over. But Vargo's face twisted with rage and fear, his men shifting nervously as the weight of the setup dawned on them. No, he snarled, waving his gun. You think you can corner me? You don't know who I work for. You don't know how big this is. Grace's expression didn't change, but her eyes burned. I know enough. I know the syndicate has spread its roots from Moscow to D.C. I know you were their salesman of death. And I know tonight is the end of your line. Phones kept recording, the live stream capturing every revelation, every quiver of fear in the faces of men who thought they held the power. What the world saw was a trembling waitress transform into a ghost of war, tearing the masks off killers and showing them for what they really were. And just as Vargo opened his mouth to protest again, the front doors burst wide and tactical boots thundered in. Marines in full-force recon gear swept the room, their movements coordinated, practiced, unstoppable. Ghost Team responding. The call echoed off the walls, and in seconds the Scorpion Cell was staring down rifles held by men who had trained for years to end nights exactly like this. Patrons ducked low, wide-eyed, as federal marshals and recon operators swarmed the lantern. Grace stood perfectly still at the center of it all, her torn shirt exposing the tattoo that had frozen killers in their tracks. Her scars, a map of battles, survived. And in that storm of controlled chaos, one truth rang clear. The waitress was gone. The ghost was unmasked. The harbor lantern was no longer a bar, but a battlefield frozen in aftermath. The smell of spilled beer mixing with the acrid bite of gun oil as Force Recon operators forced Vargo's men to their knees, zip ties cutting into their wrists, while patrons pressed against the walls in stunned silence, realizing they had spent the evening drinking beside federal agents, undercover Marines, and ghosts who had been hiding in plain sight. Vargo himself was pinned against a table, his weapon kicked away, sweat running down his face as if the weight of his own exposure had crushed the arrogance out of him. Grace Walker stood only a few feet away, back straight, torn shirt revealing the tattoo that had silenced the room. She didn't move toward him with rage, didn't shout or curse. Instead, she watched with that deadly stillness, the kind that made hardened killers shiver because it wasn't anger, they feared it was certainty. Evan Cole slammed a file onto the table in front of Vargo, a thick folder that had been waiting for this moment. We have you, Alexei Vargo. Arms trafficking, war crimes, 23 counts of negligent homicide linked to your defective armor sales. You're finished. Vargo let out a rasping laugh, broken and desperate, but still defiant. Finished? You fools. You think I'm the head? I am nothing but one branch. Cut me down and others grow in my place. The syndicate owns you all. Governments rise and fall, but war is forever. His accent thickened, the mask gone, his words spilling with venom. You have no idea how deep the roots run. Moscow, Berlin, Caracas, even your own capital. You think your country is clean? You are blind. A chill ran through the lantern because the way he said it carried the ring of truth. Grace stepped closer then, her boots quiet against the sticky floor, and the room instinctively leaned in. You're right about one thing, she said, her voice steady. You're not the head. You're just middle management, a salesman for the syndicate, disposable and forgettable. But tonight, you're also a message. They'll know Ghost 7 is still alive, and they'll know we're coming. Vargo's face twisted, his arrogance buckling under the weight of her words. Ghost 7, he spat. We studied you. We built profiles. We knew you would come for me. That's why they sent me out first. You are predictable, Walker. They wanted you to show yourself. Colonel Whitaker bristled at the revelation, but Grace didn't flinch. Then they underestimated me the same way you did. You thought I was prey in this bar, too weak to fight back. You thought wrong. The syndicate has always thought wrong. Vargo strained against his restraints, his voice rising. You can't win. For every cell you burn, 2 more rise. In Washington, there is a man they call Falcon. He sits in your own halls of power, feeding us information, protecting us from your justice. You'll never touch him. The name landed like a gunshot in the lantern, and for a moment even the operators holding him shifted uneasily. A traitor inside Washington, an enemy in their own capital, was more dangerous than any gun pointed at them. Evan Cole leaned closer, voice low and venomous. Then you just gave us the thread we needed. Vargo smirked, even through his fear. You think he'll let me live to testify? You've already lost. They will silence me before dawn. Grace crouched down so her eyes were level with his, her tone softer now but heavy with the kind of conviction that made liars crumble. No, Alexei, the only thing you lost is control. Every move you've made, every shipment, every payment we've been watching, tonight wasn't an accident. This bar, these people, this whole town, it was all bait and you walked right in. For the first time, his confidence shattered completely, the smirk dying on his lips as he realized he had not trapped Ghost 7, she had trapped him. The marshals dragged him to his feet, hauling him toward the waiting convoy outside. News vans were already pulling up, the glow of headlights painting the walls as reporters scrambled, sensing the kind of story that could topple governments. Grace stood back, watching as the man who had haunted her nightmares was dragged away. But there was no triumph in her face, only resolve. Colonel Whitaker approached slowly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You've done enough, Grace. It's over. She shook her head. No, Colonel, this is just the beginning. Vargo was one cell. The syndicate is bigger than any of us. And if there's a Falcon in D.C., then the war isn't out there anymore. It's here. Whitaker met her gaze, the same look he had given young Marines before battle. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of a war he couldn't command. Grace turned away from him, gathering the torn pieces of the photo Vargo had tried to destroy, the smiling face of her sister staring back at her from the fragments. She slid them into her pocket, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the center of the lantern. To the stunned patrons still huddled along the walls, she was no longer just a waitress. She was a warrior stepping out of the shadows. And though the syndicate might have been watching, waiting, even smiling at the thought of their trap, one truth had been lit in that bar like a torch carried into darkness. Ghost 7 was alive, and she was hunting. The harbor lantern reopened the next evening as if nothing had happened. Chairs upright, floors mopped, the jukebox humming the same old country songs. But beneath the surface, Oceanside had changed forever, because every person who had been in that bar the night before carried a secret they would never speak. A secret that the quiet waitress with the torn shirt was not who she seemed. And though the news vans camped outside, reported only fragments of what had occurred, suspected arms traffickers apprehended in joint operation, the legend of Ghost 7 had already begun to seep through whispers like smoke cracks. Grace Walker slipped out before dawn, her father's beat-up truck rattling down Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean black and endless beside her, the cold wind slapping through the half-open window. On the seat beside her lay the torn photograph of her sister Sarah, carefully pieced back together with tape, and in the dim light she traced her fingers over the smiling face that would never age, a reminder of why she could not stop. At the veterans' home in Fallbrook, her father coughed weakly, oxygen tube hissing, but his eyes brightened when she walked in. "Long night?" he rasped. always sharp enough to know when she carried the weight of something unsaid. Grace forced a smile, pulling a blanket higher over his shoulders. "Just another shift at the bar, Dad, nothing special." He studied her, lips tightening, but he didn't press, because men like Howard Walker knew the look of a soldier carrying ghosts. Outside his window, the sun climbed over the hills, and Grace promised herself that whatever war lay ahead, she would fight it so that her father could rest without fear. But she also knew the syndicate would not wait. By afternoon, a black SUV idled across the street from the lantern, windows tinted, engine running. Inside, two men in suits watched silently, their radios crackling in codes not meant for public ears. A waitress passing by shivered at their presence, sensing predators in polished shoes. In Washington, D.C., a file crossed a mahogany desk, stamped, "Classified Ghost Program Leak." The man who opened it was known only as Falcon, a senior official whose smile never reached his eyes. He read the report of Vargo's capture, tapped his pen twice, and whispered to an aide, "So, Ghost 7 is alive after all. Good. That will draw the others." Thousands of miles away, Grace stood on the pier in Oceanside, sea wind whipping her hair, the salty air carrying the distant sound of helicopters. Evan Cole joined her, his marshal badge clipped at his belt now, no longer hidden. "You know they won't let this rest," he said quietly. "The syndicate's already moving. We picked up chatter out of Bangkok. Ghost 8's gone dark." Grace kept her eyes on the horizon, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. "Maria Santos," she murmured, recalling the Force Recon captain who had vanished 2 years earlier, rumored killed in a training accident. "If she's still alive, they'll use her as bait." Evan nodded grimly. "Exactly. They'll expect you to come running." Grace almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Then maybe I should." Colonel Whitaker appeared behind them, his posture still rigid despite retirement. "If you go, you'll be going without sanction. The Pentagon's already furious this operation ran without clearance. They'll recall every ghost they can find, bury the program before it embarrasses them further." Grace turned to face him, her eyes clear, steady. "Then bury it. Ghosts don't need sanction. We were never supposed to exist. But if 8's in trouble, I'm not leaving her behind." Whitaker sighed, recognizing the steel in her tone. "You'll be alone." Grace shook her head. "No one's ever really alone. Not when veterans still watch from porches, when fathers still tell their daughters to stand tall, when neighbors still keep silent promises. They can call me dead, they can erase me from their files, but I'm not invisible. Not anymore." As if to prove her words, a familiar figure stepped from the crowd of fishermen hauling nets nearby Bo Ramirez, no longer just the bouncer at the lantern, his earpiece visible now, eyes alert. "Overwatch doesn't clock out, Walker," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of loyalty. "Where you go, I go." Evan gave a dry laugh. "Looks like you're stuck with us, Grace." She looked at them both, gratitude flickering in her eyes, then returned her gaze to the ocean. Somewhere across that horizon, Maria Santos was waiting or already caught in the syndicate's snare, and time was running short. That night, back in her small apartment above the laundromat, Grace found an envelope slid under her door. No stamp, no address, just her name written in block letters. She opened it carefully, and inside lay a single photograph. Maria, hair tied back, sitting on a bench in Bangkok, feeding pigeons. On the back of the photo were 2 words written in ink she recognized instantly: "Come alone." Grace exhaled slowly, folding the paper between her fingers. The syndicate had made its move, bold and deliberate, leaving her no room for hesitation. She sat in the dark a long time, the city's neon glow slipping through the blinds, her sister's taped photograph resting against the new one in her hand. 2 faces, 2 battles, 1 promise. When dawn came, she packed a small bag, checked her sidearm, and left Oceanside without a sound. The harbor lantern returned to its nightly rhythm. Her father slept peacefully in Fallbrook, and the coastal town carried on as if nothing had shifted. But somewhere above the Pacific, a woman who had once been a ghost was already chasing shadows again, knowing this war was only beginning and that every mile she traveled would take her closer not just to the syndicate but to the truth buried at the heart of power itself. Bangkok struck Grace Walker like a living furnace the moment she stepped off the plane, the humid air clinging to her skin, heavy with exhaust fumes, fried street food, and the endless noise of a city that never truly slept. She traveled under the name Jennifer Walsh, Her passport, a careful fabrication built from layers of backstory. Her bags filled with camera equipment to sell the illusion of a freelance photographer. She moved with the casual stride of a tourist, yet every step carried the weight of training drilled into her bones. Never walk the same route twice, scan reflections in glass, use crowds as cover. Marcus Bo Ramirez shadowed her at a distance, his bulk hidden under the loose shirt and baseball cap of an American backpacker, while Evan Cole took a later flight, approaching from another angle, because ghosts never arrived in one piece. They slipped in like smoke. The safe house they rented was a third-floor apartment above a noodle shop, the walls scarred with age but reinforced with steel plates, the windows fitted with ballistic glass painted to look ordinary. The elderly woman who ran the kitchen downstairs served bowls of steaming pad thai with the efficiency of someone who once field-stripped rifles in the jungle. She never asked questions, and that was exactly why Harrison's network had trusted her. On the table inside, Marcus spread a map, his finger tracing a circle 6 blocks from the port. Warehouse 47, Klong Toei District. That's where Petrov said she was last seen. Grace studied the aerial photos spread beside it, the lines of corrugated roofs, the narrow alleys like veins waiting to choke anyone who entered. Too tight, she muttered. Too many blind corners. If she was there, she's long gone. Maria's smarter than to stay in a kill box, Marcus grunted. Then where? Grace didn't answer immediately, because something about the city's rhythm tugged at her memory, the way signs were tagged with strange graffiti, the arrangement of trash bins too deliberate to be coincidence. Ghost protocol. Maria was leaving breadcrumbs. At dawn the next morning, Grace followed them through the city, a symbol drawn in chalk on a lamppost, 3 beer bottles stacked upside down at a corner stall, a folded origami crane tucked into the bars of a park fence. Each mark pulled her deeper into the heart of Bangkok until she reached Lumpini Park, its wide green space glowing under the rising Sunday. There, on the northwest corner, she saw her Maria Santos, Ghost 8, dressed in yoga pants and an oversized shirt, her hair in a messy bun, scattering breadcrumbs to pigeons like any other tired mother. To most eyes, she was invisible, but Grace saw it immediately, the way Maria's hands never strayed far from her bag, the subtle scanning of every jogger, every cyclist. Grace sat beside her, keeping her movements slow, controlled. "You look like hell," Maria murmured without looking up. Grace smirked faintly. "You look like a soccer mom." Maria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "They're watching us, cameras on every corner, men with long sleeves hiding bulges at their waistlines. This whole city is a net." Grace leaned back, pretending to stretch, then talk fast. Maria slipped a small encrypted drive into her hand, disguised as a packet of birdseed. "Everything I've gathered. Names, money trails, operations. Claiborne in D.C., Lue in Hong Kong, Katerina Volkov in Switzerland. They're the council, Grace. They profit from every war. Vargo was just a pawn." Grace's chest tightened at the names. "How deep?" Maria's eyes hardened. "Deeper than we thought. They don't just supply wars. They create them. False flags, assassinations, weapons to both sides. That armor that killed your sister, it wasn't an accident. They needed American coffins on TV to justify contracts worth billions." Grace's breath caught, her pulse steadying into the cold fury she knew too well. But before she could answer, a jogger passed too close, his earbuds dangling, his eyes hidden by dark glasses. Maria's body stiffened. Grace followed the reflection in the pond and saw them, men moving into position, 2 at the north gate, 3 by the lake, more disguised as vendors. A perfect circle tightening. Maria whispered, "They think we're here to set up an assault team. They expect helicopters, special forces, the whole ghost program. They're ready for a war." Grace slipped the crane she had folded from her boarding pass into Maria's hand, her voice low. "Then give them a war." The pigeons scattered suddenly, wings erupting in a flurry of white. The jogger reached for his waistband. Grace's hand was already inside her bag. The syndicate had sprung their trap, but what they didn't know was that ghosts never ran, they hunted. And in the heat of Bangkok's dawn, 2 women who had been declared dead by their own government prepared to remind the world that ghosts never truly disappeared. The morning in Lumpini Park looked almost ordinary to the joggers and Tai Chi groups scattered across the lawns, but Grace Walker felt the air shift, the way a soldier senses a coming ambush. The pigeons had scattered too suddenly, The jogger's stride was too controlled, and every vendor seemed to watch without watching. Maria Santos sat stiffly beside her, her hands still scattering crumbs to mask the small encrypted drive she had passed a moment before, but her jaw was tight, her eyes cutting across the park with the precision of a sniper scanning rooftops. Grace adjusted her jacket, lowering her voice to a murmur. North Gate, 2 men in long sleeves. West Path, 3 more, pretending to sell bottled water. They've got us in a circle. Maria didn't flinch. They think you came with a team. They're waiting for helicopters. They don't realize it's just us. Grace's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Then let's disappoint them. The jogger who had passed earlier suddenly turned, his hand flashing to his waistband. Before the pistol cleared leather, Grace was already moving. She shoved Maria sideways off the bench and dropped low, drawing her own concealed weapon, her first shot punching through his shoulder. The crack split the still morning, pigeons exploding upward, joggers screaming, Tai Chi groups breaking into chaos. Syndicate operatives sprang from cover, weapons appearing like magic from beneath jackets. Civilians scattered, but some froze in fear, caught in the storm they didn't understand. Maria rolled to her knees, her oversized yoga bag snapping open to reveal a compact SMG broken into parts. Her hands moved with muscle memory, snapping the weapon together in seconds. "You always did like being dramatic," she muttered, firing a burst that dropped 2 men near the lake. Grace moved like water, each step deliberate, low, controlled, firing and shifting, never giving the enemy a fixed target. But the syndicate had numbers, and within seconds the park was a battlefield, tourists running, sirens wailing in the distance. "We've got 5 minutes before local police flood this place," Maria called out, sliding behind a concrete planter. Grace ducked beside her, reloading, her voice calm. 5 minutes is enough. A man with a headset barked orders in harsh Russian, accented English, coordinating the encirclement. Grace's eyes narrowed. "They're not here to kill us. They're here to confirm I'm alive." Maria fired another burst. "Then you've already given them what they wanted." Grace's jaw tightened. "Not yet. We flipped this back on them." She pulled the origami crane Maria had given her from her pocket, set it on the ground between them. "Old methods, analog. When they report in, we make sure they take the wrong story home." Before Maria could reply, a voice boomed across the park through a loudspeaker. "Grace Walker, Ghost 7, we know you're alive. You don't have to run. Falcon sends his regards." The name sliced through her like ice, because hearing it confirmed what Vargo had already hinted at. Falcon wasn't just a code name whispered in DC. He was orchestrating this hunt, pulling strings from the heart of her own government. Maria's eyes widened. "They're burning your cover publicly. If the syndicate doesn't kill you, Washington will drag you back in chains." Grace steadied her breathing, her combat calm slipping into place. "Then neither side gets to write the story. We do." With that, she rose from cover, firing 2 shots that cracked the headset of the man barking orders, then dropped back as Maria's burst cut a path through the vendor's stall. The operative staggered but regrouped, pressing in tighter, when suddenly Marcus Bo Ramirez's voice crackled through Grace's earpiece. "Overwatch in position, north rooftop. You've got 30 seconds to move." A sniper round snapped across the park, dropping one of the syndicate's men like a puppet with strings cut. Panic rippled through their formation. Grace seized the moment, dragging Maria toward the eastern exit. Bullets tore bark from trees and shattered benches. But every step was measured, every return shot precise. By the time they crashed into a waiting tuk-tuk idling near the curb, sirens were already echoing closer. The driver, an old Thai with sharp eyes, gunned the engine without a word, and the 3 of them vanished into Bangkok's crowded streets just as police swarmed the park. In the rattling back seat, Maria shoved the encrypted drive deeper into Grace's pocket. "That's the syndicate's ledger. Accounts, contacts, operations. Claiborne in Dietze, Katarina Volkov in Switzerland, and Falcon. We've got enough to blow them open if we live long enough to use it." Grace wiped blood from her cheek, her voice steady even as adrenaline surged. "Then we make sure we live. They wanted proof I was alive? Good. Now the whole world knows. But Falcon just made a mistake." Maria frowned. "What mistake?" Grace looked out over the chaos of Bangkok traffic, her eyes hard. He thinks ghosts run alone. He's about to find out what happens when all of us start moving together. The tuk-tuk rattled through the chaos of Bangkok's traffic, horns blaring, mopeds weaving like schools of fish, the city alive and oblivious to the fact that two women in the back seat had just ignited a war that would stretch across continents. Grace Walker pressed a rag against the cut on her cheek, the sting sharp but grounding, while Maria Santos leaned back, breathing hard, her weapon hidden beneath a tourist's shopping bag. Marcus Ramirez's voice crackled through the comms from his rooftop perch. "You're clear for now, but they'll regroup. Syndicate never leaves loose ends." Grace closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, steadying her pulse the way she had in deserts and mountains, because she knew this wasn't about surviving a gunfight anymore. It was about pulling a thread that could unravel the Syndicate's entire web. The encrypted drive weighed heavy in her pocket, not just metal and circuits, but the lives of everyone who had died for profit, the names of the powerful who had fed the machine. "We can't keep running," Maria muttered, her voice raw. "Falcon knows you're alive. They'll spin this so fast you'll be branded rogue, terrorist, traitor. By tonight, half of Washington will believe Ghost 7 went dark to sell intel." Grace opened her eyes, her gaze like steel. "Then we stop letting them write the story. We write it ourselves." She pulled from her bag a folded crane paper torn from her boarding pass. She placed it on Maria's knee, then on Marcus's headset. "Old signals, analog. They can't trace what isn't digital. We go back to the beginning. Ghost protocol." Marcus chuckled darkly. "Back to pigeons and payphones. Never thought I'd miss the old days." That night, in the safe house above the noodle shop, the network came alive. Maria spread out the encrypted drive's contents across an old corkboard: maps, names, bank transfers, photographs of men in suits shaking hands with warlords. Grace moved methodically, pinning strings between them, tracing lines from Bangkok to Berlin, from Moscow to DC, from Swiss banks to Caribbean shells. Each connection was a vein of corruption, pulsing with blood money. "They call themselves a council," Maria explained quietly. 5 of them: Claiborne in Washington, Lue in Hong Kong, Katerina Volkov in Zurich, 2 names still buried in shadows. They don't just profit from war, Grace, they design it. They decide when peace dies and chaos begins. Grace stared at Sarah's taped photo beside the board, her sister's smile frozen in time. Then it's time to design their downfall. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "How?" "They've got governments in their pocket, armies on retainer, and Falcon feeding them your every move from inside DC. Grace turned slowly, her eyes burning with conviction. "By waking every ghost they buried. 15 operators across the globe, each with their own networks, their own scars. They thought we'd stay in the shadows. They were wrong. We go loud." Maria blinked, startled. "You want to activate all of them at once?" Grace nodded. "They studied me, profiled me, thought they could predict every move I'd make, but they never studied us together. They've never seen what happens when every ghost stands up at the same time." The safe house fell silent, the weight of her words heavy. Then Maria smiled grimly. "Then let's light the match." The next 48 hours blurred into motion. In Berlin, a bookshop owner who had once been Ghost 5 locked his doors and pulled out an old radio, sending coded phrases disguised as poetry readings. In Moscow, Ghost 12, now a ballet instructor, slipped notes into lockers of Spetsnaz veterans disillusioned with oligarch wars. In Bogotá, Ghost 9 used street children to pass origami cranes through markets, each fold carrying instructions. In Cairo, Mumbai, Mexico City, even in small American towns, veterans who had quietly watched their streets rose from their silence. They were mechanics, teachers, cab drivers, widows, but all of them ghosts who had once been declared dead and were now breathing fire back into the world. The syndicate noticed. Of course, chatter spiked, financial accounts froze, coded networks buzzed, but they misread the signs, convinced it was the build-up to a single military strike, a hammer waiting to fall. They prepared for jets, for drones, for special forces raids. What they weren't ready for was an army of invisible hands turning every bolt of their machine against them. Grace stood before the corkboard, the hum of the city outside, her fingers tracing the red string that led straight back to Washington. Falcon, the inside man, the betrayal at the heart of it all. She whispered softly, almost a prayer, Respect is earned, not given, and freedom means standing tall even when you shake. Maria heard her and nodded, eyes steady. Then let's make the world shake. Washington, D.C. glowed under its marble monuments, the city dressed in the illusion of stability. But Grace Walker knew the truth as she traced the skyline on a map pinned to the wall. Behind her, the safe house corkboard was littered with photographs, bank records, and red string converging on one name, Falcon. Every battle she had fought, every scar that marked her skin, every friend she had buried had led her here not to a desert ambush or a hidden bunker, but to the betrayal festering inside her own capital. Maria Santos sat on the floor, her fingers moving over an encrypted laptop, eyes narrowing as new names scrolled across the screen. "They're nervous," she said softly. "Money is shifting. Accounts are freezing. Claiborne is spooked. Volkov's gone underground. But Falcon, he's too calm. That means he's ready to move." Marcus Ramirez leaned against the door, rifle balanced across his knees, his voice rough but certain. "Then we move first. Ghosts don't wait for permission. We strike where it hurts." Grace turned from the board and let her gaze rest on the taped photograph of her sister Sarah, her smile forever frozen in uniform blues. She whispered, "Every scar I carry is a debt unpaid, and Falcon's ledger is long overdue." The phone on the table buzzed, a single message lighting the screen. Bangkok was just the opening move. "Next is D.C." F. Maria exhaled sharply. "He's taunting you. He wants you chasing his shadow." Grace shook her head slowly, the steel in her voice unshakable. "No, he wants me predictable, but ghosts don't march in straight lines. We bend, we vanish, we reappear where they least expect us, and this time we bring light into every corner they thought safe." She picked up her jacket, slid the encrypted drive into her pocket, and stepped toward the door. Outside, Bangkok pulsed with scooters, neon, and restless energy, life moving forward, as if the world were not balancing on the edge of revelation. Grace paused in the doorway, her words quiet but carrying the weight of a vow. "It's not over. It's never over. But the syndicate is no longer hunting us. We're hunting them." And then she walked into the night, vanishing into the crowd, leaving only the whisper of a promise that this was just the beginning. And for you, listening now, maybe you understand why stories like this matter, because sometimes the smallest figure in the room carries the heaviest strength, and because freedom means standing tall even when your knees are shaking. If Grace's fight has left you with something to hold on to, I invite you to share this story with someone who might need it. A simple, like a share or following this channel, helps keep these voices alive, keeps these hidden battles from being forgotten. Thank you for spending this time with us, and until the next story, stay safe, stand tall, and remember, real strength often hides in the quietest places.